Have you seen this man? More specifically, have you seen him in a City kit? If you're a City fan, then the answer is probably yes, if only in flashes here and there, little blink and you'll miss it cameos, like catching a shadow in your peripheral vision, and by the time you turn your head, it's already gone. If you follow England closely, then thanks to his performances in the past and a great relationship with Gareth Southgate, you will have seen him much more than average. But for anyone who doesn't watch City or England regularly, Kalvin Phillips has effectively vanished. Disappeared from the limelight as quickly, perhaps even faster, than he arrived. And when did he arrive, truly arrive, on the world stage? Back in 2021, during Euro 2020, that's a confusing sentence, but you understand my meaning. Phillips was sublime, taking his already ferocious form from under Bielsa at Leeds and applying that to England's magical run on home turf all the way to the final of Euro 2020. Well, they did have a quick vacation to Rome at one point to trounce Ukraine in the quarters, but back in London, England, and by extension Phillips, were purring. The Yorkshire Pirlo was the name he carried into that tournament, and while he doesn't really resemble the fabled Italian's playstyle, if you take the moniker as a simple compliment to his ability, then it went a long way in describing how well Phillips was playing at that time. However, skip forward about 2.5 years, and following a massive move to Manchester City, we've barely seen him. So what happened? How did he go from being seen as the next great Pep midfielder to a shadow in your peripherals? There one moment, and only for a moment, and gone the next. But there's a silver lining. With Phillips, you can never count him out, nor be surprised if he should bounce back. To dive deep into the unfortunate fall of Phillips at Manchester City thus far, today we'll be joined by the great Amos Murphy of Give Me Sport, as well as the co-founder of the City Report podcast. All of his links are below, pretty close to the subscribe button as well, so why not click all of the links and buttons while you're down there? Hey, I'm Adrian, and let's jump in. Not that dislike button. Don't. Now, I'm sure you've seen or heard his childhood story already, but I think it's important to paint a picture of who he is. So here are the salient points. To say that Calvin Phillips had a difficult childhood would be an understatement. He and his brother shared a room upstairs in their 3-bedroom home in Leeds, with his 2 sisters downstairs and his mother sleeping on the couch. Phillips says that his mother would often go without eating in order to ensure her kids wouldn't go hungry, working 2 jobs to provide what she could, while his grandmother would chip in with food when she had the opportunity to do so. His father, while he has a decent relationship with him, he was a transient figure in his life. He'd be around 1 minute, then in jail the next. Rinse and repeat. But while they didn't have a lot growing up, what Phillips always had was football, which he would play constantly. He'd play with his friends, he'd play for Wortley, he played for his school, and eventually at the age of 15, he signed with Leeds Academy in 2010. To sign with a club at that age is actually quite late by most professional players' standards, which sounds ridiculous to say, but it's true. Regardless, without getting too into the weeds at Leeds, the Leeds weeds, Calvin Phillips caught the eye for his technical ability on the ball, his work rate, and how no matter what, he always had a smile. The opportunity was seemingly never really lost on him, and that's something that he stayed consistent with. I don't know him at all. Shock, I know. But in the classic internet parasocial fashion, I declare him a good egg and a likable dude. My sources, general vibes, reading, and trust me, bro. But no, honestly, everything I've read about him from those who played with him growing up or coached him have nothing but glowing reviews about the guy and his general disposition and attitude, including one Marcelo Bielsa, who arrived at Leeds in 2018 and who took a liking to Phillips almost immediately. Bielsa and Leeds would go on to become an incredible side in the championship, and with Phillips in particular, I mean, tell him, Amos.
It became quite clear early on that he was the next big thing. He obviously had quite a lot of interest from clubs in the Premier League, even when he was in the Championship. That Championship team that won the league with Bielsa, it was spellbinding to watch. The only unfortunate thing for Leeds fans was that the second half of it came during COVID, so they didn't get to sort of really enjoy it and embrace it. But at the heart of it was this lad from Leeds who was sort of taking the league by storm a little bit. I think they played Arsenal in the FA Cup. And he shone. This is against Premier League opposition, a tough test, and he was a standout player.
And he would absolutely continue on as a standout player, helping Leeds to promotion back into the Premier League after a 16-year absence. And to illustrate just how much Bielsa leaned upon his midfield maestro, just take a look at this video. From there, he would go on to become a very, very important figure in the English national team, the apex of which being his performances at Euro 2020. He certainly started on the right foot in that tournament, playing a perfect ball to Raheem Sterling for what would be the winner against Croatia in their opening match, and going on to play in every single match that followed, only once being subbed off, when England were winning 4-0 already against Ukraine. Other than that, he played every single minute. Things didn't go well forever though, as his second season in the Premier League saw him suffer from a hamstring injury, missing from action for almost 4 months, and in that time, Bielsa was sacked. But from the tragedy, he'd returned to help Leeds survive in the Premier League for one more season. It was here that he decided it would be a good time to leave his boyhood club. He'd helped them get back into the Premier League for the first time in 16 years. He helped them to a respectable 9th place in their returning season in the Premier League, and he helped save them from relegation in the season that followed. He could have chosen plenty of clubs to join, as they were all queuing up for the talented English midfielder, but he chose City. There were some questions as to how he would adapt to Guardiola's style, but
I think the biggest one was injuries, because he'd missed a chunk of games for Leeds, and they weren't necessarily sort of a full year out. There wasn't an ACL, there wasn't a sort of, a recurring injury. It'd be weird ones. We'll get onto it, but he had a shoulder problem. I mean, players have shoulder problems, but it's not necessarily something you associate with a professional football, or at least that will keep him out. It was like a month here, 2 weeks there, and he'd missed chunks of the season, which I think for some supporters, when he's being signed for City, he's coming in as the Fernandinho replacement, but at the same time, the Rodri backup. And those are 2 gigantic shoes, well, 4 gigantic shoes to fill, to be literal with it. But those injury issues were a doubt, because you're going, okay, well, fair enough. If he's going to come in and play a backup role, that's fine, but he needs to be ready to go. The caveat to that, and we saw it with another Yorkshireman, Erling Haaland, in the same season, City's medical team is top notch. They know how to get the best out of players. They know when to rest players. They know how to sort of prevent those niggling injuries that have taken hold of players' career elsewhere. So there was a sort of a confidence perhaps that, okay, yes, he's been, for want of a better term, potentially overworked by Bielsa. I know plenty of players and pundits and whoever else have spoke about the intensity Bielsa works with. Not going to be much different under Guardiola, I guess. They're cut from the same cloth, but you would expect that now coming to City, he is going to be a little bit more refined with the way he handles his body. Again, though, it hasn't worked out.
First of all, referring to Erling Haaland as a Yorkshireman, that caught me off guard. But I mean, it is true. It is true.
Yeah.
It's just thinking of him in that way is really, really entertaining. Now, we will speak more about Calvin Phillips' injury record later, as that for sure has played a role. In fact, Phillips himself has said that the first thing Guardiola said to him when he arrived at City was for him to stay fit. And what happened? He was injured almost immediately with a back injury. But anyway, let's look at how he fit into this Man City side. There were 2 players that Amos mentioned there, Fernandinho and Rodri. Those are the 2 individuals that Phillips would be replacing in one instance, competing against, or playing alongside in the other instance, in City's midfield.
He's a player who can play alongside a more traditional 6, in this case, Declan Rice. And when he arrived at City, there was a lot of talk about him then going in next to Rodri, as opposed to sort of shadowing Rodri as the backup, and there was some suggesting that perhaps this could lead to an innovation. Pep Guardiola's had plenty, but this could now potentially lead to an innovation where we start seeing City play a 3-5-2, because in the same summer, obviously, Haaland and Alvarez were signed, and they're 2 world-class centre forwards. So there was people sort of putting the predicted lineups together, and we've got 3 centre-backs. You've got Kalvin Phillips, who, ironically, we saw it later on in the season, John Stones doing that role, but from the opposite end, a centre-back stepping into midfield. Phillips could easily have been the guy to come from midfield and into centre-back. And without sort of hypothesising a little bit, I do wonder if he was signed to do that role, because we saw Rico Lewis sort of deployed in that in the treble run for City. We then saw, obviously, John Stones, and we've since seen Manuel Akanji. Again, though, I guess you could get him as a sole 6 against the lower half team where you're going to dominate possession. That's one of his strengths, but he's never really been given the chance more than anything to sort of stake a claim for a single position.
Now, people who have been watching this channel for a bit, well, at least in the last year or so, will know where we're going with this. Fear it run from it, but Adrian will speak of John Stones and that hybrid role he played for City from last season to the present. I won't go into that again, guys. You've heard it enough from myself and plenty of others, I am sure of it. And I'm sure plenty will have looked at that role, as Amos said, and thought, hey, why not Phillips? Phillips himself will have probably thought, why him, not me? Why him and not me? There seems to have been a major confluence of things working against Phillips, such as, well, a certain treble run that Guardiola was trying to lock down.
The bottom line is he hasn't played enough. And there's a reason he hasn't played enough. Some people will say it's because, quite simply, he's not good enough. Some people will say that he's been unlucky with injuries, he wasn't given the chance. Others will say, well, you couldn't have afforded to change the starting lineup in that treble run for City. One drop point, one lost game, and suddenly, the season collapses in on itself. I think in truth, it's probably a combination of the three. And John Stones going on to establish himself as the guy who's doing that role. The opportunities have been slim. When he has come on, it's been 30 minutes here, 15 minutes there at the end of a game when City are already 3-0 up. He's coming on at a lot of the time with youth products and academy graduates and getting chucked the odd 15 minutes. And you can never impose yourself on that sort of game because, well, for starters, the game is already won, but also the personnel has changed. I think I'm right in saying he's never played with City's strongest lineup. And that is telling because, he's never played alongside a De Bruyne or a Phil Foden or a Bernardo Silva. And that naturally brings your game down because you want to be surrounded by the better players. But it is certainly, he has been a victim of the success of other players for sure.
There are few who watch Rodri and wouldn't put him in the top 2 or 3 holding midfielders in the world in the current day. Some, such as myself, would actually put him at number 1 in the world at the moment, but that's not what we're here to debate. Playing in the same team as someone such as that certainly makes your life difficult in some ways. Of course, we went over already how he was overlooked as far as someone who could play next to Rodri, as that was taken by Rico Lewis, John Stones, Bernardo, Mateus Nunes now, Kovacic now. Take your pick. Where it all gets a bit worrying for Phillips is when you consider the fact that they opted to bring in another bit of competition for him this past summer, Mateus Nunes and Kovacic. Worrying even further, when Rodri was suspended for 2 matches, what did Guardiola do? Against Wolves, he started with Kovacic and Mateus Nunes together. Against Arsenal, Kovacic, Bernardo, and Rico Lewis in the midfield. So is it an attitude thing? Is it a training thing?
You have to reach a level every day.
Amos, tell us, man.
This is part of the conundrum, really, because whenever Calvin Phillips has come up in press conferences for Guardiola, for interviews post-match, whenever teammates have been asked about him, it's always been the highest of high praises. It's always credited his level. He's a consummate professional, and that's very clear from the way he's operated, the way he's spoken, the way he interviews himself, and even still the way he's handling himself now. He isn't playing, and granted, he's winning trophies. He was part of a Champions League winning team last season. That's going to be beneficial to anybody. But at the same time, as a professional athlete, you're going to want to be the guy who's playing a key part of that. He's a bubbly character. He's never once let his head get down, and that's something that has to be praised. And that's something Guardiola spoke about a lot. Every time he's been asked about him, it's been about the character. It hasn't been about the football, and I guess that kind of speaks volumes because you've got a man who you spent the best part of £50 million on, and you're speaking about how nice of a guy he is. And there comes a point, I guess, when you play in elite level European football that kind of has to switch, and I don't think it has, and it looks like it won't.
So it can't be injuries, as he has been healthy for about a year now without any major injuries on his record. It can't be that he hasn't been training at the optimal level. So what is it exactly that causes Guardiola to consistently overlook Phillips? Even though he isn't playing, he's still getting selected and played by Southgate. Amos pointed to the fact that beyond Rice, there isn't much competition for that area of the pitch, and they play quite well together anyway.
I think his deficiencies come when it's in transition and it's going the opposite way, and I think Guardiola has pointed this out a couple of times, that he doesn't necessarily keep up with play. And in those games at the back end of last season, even when there wasn't much on the line, there still was that feeling that maybe he is a touch off it. That at the time, people didn't know if it was because of the injuries, because of the lack of game time, because of the style of the match he was playing in. But I think if you've got him on the ball, absolutely perfect. That is his strength. That is what he can do well. He can pick passes. He can even surge forward. He is a competent footballer. However, potentially the way City play can get overexposed at the back, or at least in the transition.
So let's wrap this up with a nice bow here. We touched upon his injuries, we touched upon City's shape, the treble run, and how Guardiola is loath to make any changes. I mean, he's justified in his actions, isn't he? The team comes before the individual, but that doesn't make it any less unfortunate for Phillips on a human level. Especially aggravating for him will be that the injury that led to a lengthy layoff came in a friendly, not just any friendly, but a mid-season friendly against Barcelona. This random injury to his shoulder was actually one that had hampered him back at Leeds as well. It was a recurring one for him. So City and Phillips decided to nip it in the bud. Take care of the injury once and for all, at least so far, with surgery. However,
and it sort of sparked off a really damaging timeline, in my opinion, for Calvin Phillips, because he misses the first, what I'd say is 3 months of the season, the August, the September, the October. And for any Guardiola signing, we're seeing it now with Jeremy Doku, Mateus Nunes, Josko Gvardiol. For any Guardiola signing, that is the time you're getting minutes, because when you get into the second half of the season, you're competing for trophies, you're in the Champions League latter stages. We know Guardiola doesn't like to make substitutions at the best of times, let alone rotate his team. So that's where you're getting, the start against a Champions League group stage opponent, or a League Cup appearance, or even an FA Cup going into the new year.
but this is where the unfortunate downfall continues with Phillips at Manchester City. The World Cup. For the first time ever, the World Cup is held mid-season, and Phillips makes the squad. But as Amos pointed out, Phillips was just returning from his surgery and was working on getting his fitness levels back up to his City standards. Now, going away to Qatar and training in that ridiculous heat is difficult, and teams were limited in that regard, as any further training than about an hour or so would completely exhaust them. While he featured here and there for England, 2 appearances off of the bench, he wasn't playing often, and coupled with the limited training regime,
he gets back to City, and then suddenly the infamous, or now infamous, overweight comments from Pep Guardiola. And I will be honest, I think that's been misinterpreted somewhat, because Guardiola and professional athletes being overweight isn't like, you, I, or the average Joe who've had too much fast food or over Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever. We're talking like, maybe even a pound. But that sort of really sets him back. That damages his trust. He's gone over, he's had a different training regime, he's not played, he's just got back from injury, he comes back and he's in worse state than before he left. And from there on in, he's not getting minutes, he's only getting substitute appearances when the game's won. Obviously, RODRI'S now emerging as the elite talent. John Stones is doing his thing, stepping into midfield. So it's like, it's just a series of unfortunate events, I feel, with Calvin Phillips, which has led to a position where his place in the City team feels untenable, and it feels like it's well past its expiry date.
This does all sound a bit doom and gloom, but I really don't think that it is. As we've tried to illustrate, Phillips is still a quality player, as evidenced by his time playing under Bielsa and for England. Not everyone that goes to Manchester City is going to succeed. I mean, they are the European champions, Premier League champions, FA Cup champions. They've won, 5 out of the previous 6 Premier League titles, etc, etc, etc. Not succeeding at any given club doesn't always come down to either being a good player or being an overrated player. There's nuance, there's gray areas, there's circumstances that lead to success or failure. Phillips is still a great footballer, and wherever he may go next, assuming the rumors are true that he'll be on his way soon, he'll be a great addition to that club. Thanks for watching, guys, and another big thank you to Amos for all of his help on this one. Again, his links are down below for you, so go and give him some love. He's a great dude. Beyond that, I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Hey, if you enjoyed this, why not drop a subscription? And hey, maybe a like if you're feeling extra giving on this. I think it's Thanksgiving in America, isn't it? Anyways, guys, thank you so much. I'm Adrian, and take care.